Imagine a man so stupid that his own neighbors turned his life into a game. The game was simple. Think of the single dumbest business idea you possibly can. Something guaranteed to lose money, so idiotic no person alive could profit from it. Then walk over to this man, keep a straight face, and tell him it's a brilliant investment. They played this game for years, the richest men in town taking turns, waiting for the day it finally bankrupted him and ran him out of town for good. Here's the part they couldn't explain. It kept making him richer. Not once, not by luck. Again and again, every single time, the most idiotic idea they could invent turned to gold in this man's hands, until the people trying to destroy him started to wonder if they were the stupid ones. And by the end of this, you'll have to decide something people still can't agree on. Whether you just watched the luckiest fool who ever lived, or the most brilliant con man in American history, hiding in plain sight. His name was Timothy Dexter, and to understand why everyone was so sure he was an idiot, you have to start with where he came from. He was born in 1747, dirt poor, on a farm in Massachusetts. He got maybe a few months of schooling in his whole life. He could barely read, and he could barely write. At 8, he was working as a farmhand. At 16, he was apprenticed to a man who made leather goods, and that was his whole education. Dirt and leather. By every measure the world uses to size a person up, Timothy Dexter was nothing and was going to stay nothing. Except for one move, the first clue that maybe something else was going on. At 22, this penniless, barely literate leather worker somehow convinced a wealthy widow to marry him. She had money, she had a house, and just like that, Dexter had the one thing he'd never had: a stake. Now, hold on, because here's where he made the bet everyone thought would ruin him. It's the American Revolution. The colonies are printing their own money, continental currency, and as the war drags on, it becomes a joke, worth pennies on the dollar. Everyone with any sense is dumping it as fast as they can. Timothy Dexter did the opposite. He took his money and his wife's money and bought up piles of the worthless stuff nobody wanted. The whole town watched the fool pour his fortune into paper that would never be worth anything, and they laughed. And then the war ended, a new country formed, and the new government's financial system gave holders of that discarded currency a path to trade it in and recover its value. Overnight, the worthless paper Dexter had been hoarding became a fortune. He was suddenly, genuinely rich. And this is where the story gets uncomfortable, because a lucky idiot can win once. But Dexter was about to make a habit of it, and the more it happened, the harder it became to call it luck at all. Because now he had money, and wanted the one thing it couldn't buy: respect. He wanted in with the town's elite, and they wanted nothing to do with him. To them, he was a crude, uneducated embarrassment who'd stumbled into wealth he didn't deserve. So they came up with a plan. Dexter had started buying ships to become a proper merchant, and the merchants of Newburyport saw their opening. They'd feed him terrible advice, dressed up as insider tips, the most ruinous trades they could invent. He'd sink his fortune, lose everything, and finally be gone. Here was the first one. One of them suggested, straight-faced, that Dexter ship bed-warming pans to the West Indies. Think about how cruel that is. A bed-warming pan is a metal pan you fill with hot coals to warm a freezing bed on a New England winter night. The West Indies is a tropical paradise where it is never cold. It's like shipping snow shovels to the desert, a guaranteed total loss. Dexter loved the idea. He bought thousands of the pans, some accounts say over 40,000, and shipped them south. The merchants could hardly contain themselves. Finally. And then the ships came back, with a profit. Because Dexter's man on the ground took one look at these long-handled metal scoops with lids and realized they were perfect for ladling hot molasses in the booming sugar industry. He slapped new handles on them, called them molasses ladles, and the plantation owners bought every one. Some ordered more. The trap had sprung on the people who said it. Now, if you're one of those merchants, you tell yourself it was a fluke. So you try again, harder. They told him to ship wool mittens to the same tropical islands. Idiotic. But his mittens sat in port exactly when a fleet of Asian merchant ships came through. Ships headed to cold Siberia, who bought the whole lot. They told him to ship stray cats to the Caribbean. A ship full of cats. What could be dumber? Except the islands were in the middle of a rat infestation, and the cats sold at a premium as pest control. And at this point, something changed. They weren't laughing at Dexter anymore. They were starting to study him, uneasy. because somehow every attempt to prove he was an idiot kept turning into evidence that he wasn't. So they stopped trying to be clever and reached for the most obviously, definitively stupid idea that had ever existed. They told him to ship coal, of all things, to Newcastle, and you have to understand what a savage insult that was. Newcastle was the coal capital of the world, so overflowing with it that carrying coals to Newcastle was already a phrase meaning to do something completely pointless. It was the townsfolk's masterpiece, the single most obviously doomed trade imaginable. Dexter shipped the coal, and his ships arrived in the middle of a miners' strike. The mines had stopped. The coal capital of the world had, for the first time in memory, run out of coal, and here came Dexter's ships, loaded with the one thing a desperate city needed and could not get. As the story goes, he sold it all at a massive premium, and sailed home with a barrel and a half of silver. He had turned the very definition of a pointless act into one of the most profitable trades of his life. Sit with the full weight of that pattern for a second. Every single time, the currency, the pans, the mittens, the cats, the coal, the worst idea in the world made him richer. The men who set out to ruin him had spent years handing him one fortune after another. One was heard to say the man could fall into a pit of manure and come up smelling of roses. So now we arrive at the question this whole video has been building to, the one people have never really been able to settle. Was Timothy Dexter a fool? The case that he was is strong, and it's not just the trades. Once he was rich, Dexter behaved like a man with no sense at all. He declared himself a lord in a country that had just fought a war to abolish nobility. He filled his mansion grounds with 40 enormous wooden statues of the great men of history, and standing right among them, a giant statue of himself inscribed, "I am the first in the East, the first in the West, and the greatest philosopher in the Western world." He hired a personal poet whose only job was to follow him around and praise him. He wrote a book, 8,000 words of misspelled gibberish, with not a single punctuation mark in it. And when readers complained they couldn't understand it, Dexter printed a new edition with an extra page at the back containing nothing but a block of punctuation marks, with a note telling readers to, his words, "peeper and salt it as they please. Sprinkle them in wherever you like." And near the end of his life, Dexter faked his own death, staging a full funeral, complete with a coffin, just to see how many people would mourn him. Around 3,000 showed up. And Dexter, very much alive, watched the whole thing from hiding, furious by his own account that his wife wasn't crying nearly hard enough. That is not on its face the behavior of a stable genius. But, and here is the honest turn, look again at everything he did, and a different man appears underneath. The currency bet wasn't insane. It was a bold gamble on the new nation honoring its debts. The absurd trades all shared one quiet thing. They worked because of timing, clever agents on the ground, and a man willing to take risks sensible people were too proud to touch. And the outrageous behavior, the lord title, the statues, the fake funeral, the book, every one of those stunts got him the thing he'd been denied his whole life. Attention, his name, everywhere, on everyone's lips. The fool, it turns out, understood publicity 200 years before it had a name. So which was he? And the only honest answer is that we'll never know. And that's the whole point of him. Maybe he was a genuine idiot the universe refused to let fail. Maybe he was a sharp, strange man who figured out that if the elite won't let you in the front door, you buy your way to immortality by becoming the greatest spectacle anyone's ever seen. Or maybe the reason he kept winning is the exact same reason they all called him a fool. He was the one man in town willing to do the thing everybody knew was stupid. Because everybody knew you couldn't sell coal to Newcastle. Everybody except the one man who actually tried.